I stepped into that abandoned psychiatric hospital in Ohio because me and two friends have been doing urban exploration for years. Most places we visit have a clear, predictable kind of abandonment. Water damage, the smell of old dust, empty hallways, cracked tiles, scattered papers. After a while, nothing really surprises you. But this place was different. It wasn't cheap horror movie tension. It was a thick, heavy silence, like something inside was awake, watching us from the moment we took our first step. The night was dry and cold. No wind, just that still, clinging cold that seems to stick to your clothes. Our only light came from flashlights. We moved down the main hallway, stepping over rusted gurneys, torn-off doors, and metal sheets nailed over windows. No sound. Nothing moved. The air felt stagnant. I felt that being watched sensation before, in abandoned factories, in the basements of old hotels. But this was something else. The atmosphere in that hospital didn't just feel like it was watching us. It felt like it was looking inside us. Then, in the middle of the psychiatric ward, we found a door that didn't make sense. Smooth, no markings, no number, no handle on the outside. Jake pried it open with a crowbar and it gave way too easily. That alone was weird. But what was behind the door was worse. A perfectly square room, maybe 5 meters by 5. And every inch of the 4 walls, floor to ceiling, was covered in old mirrors. No furniture, no cameras, no chairs, just mirrors. Like the only purpose of that room was to reflect. We stepped inside slowly. The temperature in there felt even colder than outside. No smell of mildew, no chemical tang, just a cold, empty scent. If absence had a smell, that was it. I did a quick test without thinking. I raised my right hand slowly. The reflection moved after, not at the same time. There was a fraction of a second delay. Mia blinked, and her reflection blinked late too. Jake pointed his GoPro at us, and the screen showed the same delay. At first, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe the uneven mirror surfaces distorted the light's return. Maybe it was a trick of perception from the flashlights. But the longer we watched, the more the reflection started acting outside any logic. My reflection in the left panel smiled while I stayed dead serious. It was fast, subtle, but unmistakable. Mia took half a step back. Jake held his breath. I raised both arms at the same time. The reflections did too, but one panel lifted a second later. In another, the image tilted its head without me moving. The feeling I got was that something was learning from our gestures, testing limits, adjusting timing, like we were being used as models. The room seemed to study us in silence. It didn't feel like a scare. It felt like an experiment. The camera started heating up for no reason. The battery dropped from over 40% to 3% in seconds. The file corrupted while it was recording. Jake yanked the battery out in a hurry. It was burning his fingers. That's when I knew we'd pushed too far. This wasn't a place we were meant to be. And worse, it felt like the room wanted us to stay longer, like it had all the time in the world. We decided to leave, carefully, no rushing, no turning our backs abruptly. We gathered what we could and left without looking back at the reflections. We shut the door and jury-rigged everything we could find to lock it from the outside. Scrap wood, metal tape, whatever was there. After that, no one said a word. There was no debate about what we'd just seen. Just the silence of people who understood without needing to put it into words. I got home that night and avoided the bathroom mirror. Walked right past it. Brushed my teeth staring at the sink more than my reflection. It wasn't childish fear. It was adult caution. When I went to bed, I closed the closet door and turned the computer monitor away. I didn't want any reflections in my line of sight in the dark. 2 days later, in the middle of the night, Jake sent me a photo. He looked serious in the picture, standing sideways in his bathroom doorway. But in the mirror's reflection, he was smiling. Not a big grin, subtle, brief, like the smile we'd seen in that left panel. The reflection seemed lit in a way that didn't match the real light. It wasn't a coincidence. And it wasn't pareidolia. The smile was there, defying his actual expression. Lena told me something similar soon after. She said she wiped her bedroom mirror with a paper towel, and the reflection stayed slightly blurred for a couple of seconds before clearing up, like the image needed time to reorganize itself. like the glass was breathing from the inside, not the outside. She described it as, the mirror didn't give it back right away. It took its time. It wasn't a surface defect. I started avoiding reflective surfaces in dimly lit spaces. If I have to walk down a dark hallway, I turn the lights on first. I don't stare at my face in a turned-off TV screen. I draped a cloth over the closet mirror. It's not superstition. It's survival based on the memory of what happened in that room. Because I know what I saw. The mirrors weren't just repeating, they were interpreting. It was like the reflections were versions ready to act, just waiting for something. It wasn't just a delay. There was intention behind the delay. Like someone or something was calibrating the timing to hit the right moment. We never went back to that room. Some places aren't built to be understood. Some places aren't meant to be explained. And I think some places weren't built by humans. Because no reflection should have a will of its own. No glass should smile first. No mirror should teach its own sense of time. And that's why I avoid mirrors in the dark. Because I've learned that some reflections don't show what's in front of them. Some reflections show what's waiting on the other side. And I don't want to be the next one who gives it enough time to learn how to get ahead completely. Creepy, right? What did you think of the story? What score would you give it from 0 to 10? Drop your opinion in the comments. It's wild how mirrors don't lie, isn't it? They just give back what exists, or what's trying to exist. And the worst part is when that reflection starts showing up in other places, like in the next story, where it appeared in a window, but it wasn't exactly human. If I had posted that video, I'd probably be screwed right now. Just thinking about watching that scene again gives me the chills, like something's clinging to the back of my neck. I'm not exaggerating. I'm talking about Crestmore Asylum, an abandoned psychiatric hospital in Ohio, and something I only noticed hours later, sitting at home, editing the footage. At the time of recording, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for that eerie silence that already had me on edge. But the camera saw something I didn't, and it was way worse than I could have imagined. To this day, I still feel a dark energy when I think about it. I've explored plenty of abandoned places, experienced strange things, even accidentally captured bizarre EVPs, but nothing compares to what I found in that window. Not at the time, but later. I arrived at Crestmore around 2:30 in the afternoon. The building is massive, and the third floor of the psychiatric ward is the most isolated. It's in the wing that caught fire back in the 70s. Burned doors, cracked paint, crumbling drywall, and this weird smell of mildew mixed with old wood. I climbed the narrow staircase, which felt like it could collapse at any second. Some steps were already rotted. I had to test each one with my foot, gripping the sides, because if I fell, no one would ever find me. The wind howled through the halls, but there were no birds, no insects, nothing. That absolute silence made me uneasy in a way I couldn't shake. I felt like I was being watched before, but this was different. It was like someone was right behind me, and all I had to do was turn around to see them. But I'd turn, and there was nothing. I set up the camera on a tripod and let it record the main hallway for about 10 minutes. My goal was to capture any strange ambient sounds, distant footsteps, unusual noises, anything. While it recorded, I just walked down the hall, staring at the burned doors, trying to imagine what it was like before the fire. Some windows still had glass, others didn't. The ones with glass were so dirty and dark, it was almost impossible to see through them. The floor was damp and I could hear bits of wood creaking underfoot. The recording was uneventful, nothing out of the ordinary. I swear if someone had been there with me, I would have noticed. There was no one. The whole hospital felt dead. No echoes, no interference, just this strange clinging sensation, like I was stepping into something that had been waiting for me. I got home and didn't review the footage until later that night. I pulled it up on my big monitor to get a better look, and I remember the exact moment my heart stopped for a few seconds. Way down at the end of the hallway, in a window behind me as I walked, there was someone standing there. A tall, motionless figure. It looked like a man, but something was off about the silhouette. I paused and zoomed in. I saw a smile. A stretched, unnatural smile, like the face was melting but still trying to look human. The more I stared, the more I felt like that smile was meant for me, as if whatever it was had been waiting for me to find it in the footage. It wasn't a natural expression. It was like a mask of flesh pulled upward, as if someone had tried to mimic a human smile but didn't know how. The first thing I thought was, someone broke in. But then I started looking closer at the figure's face, and I realized it looked like me. Not perfectly, but the features were there. The shape of the jaw, the haircut, even the way the neck sat. It was like a distorted parallel version of me, but with all the wrong proportions. The forehead was too high, the mouth too wide, the eyes sunken and dark. And I don't remember seeing anyone when I was there. I kept pausing the video, rewinding frame by frame, and the figure never moved. It didn't blink, it didn't react, it didn't breathe. It was just there, waiting to be recorded, as if whatever it was cared more about being filmed than being seen in person. I thought maybe it was a reflection. I came up with 1,000 theories, light hitting at a weird angle, my body reflecting off an uneven surface, some kind of optical illusion. But the shadow the figure cast was going in the opposite direction of the sunlight streaming in from the other end of the hall. I even did an overlay to check the light's position. The shadow was physically impossible. It was like the shadow of that thing had its own rules. That's when I felt it. The cold knot in my stomach, that primal fear, like I was being watched right then, even in my own room. I could barely blink, and I couldn't stop thinking that whatever it was had been there with me while I was filming. But my brain had ignored it. The camera had caught it, though. That was the worst part. It was like whatever it was understood our human limitations and used them against us. It only revealed itself after the fact. I thought about keeping quiet, deleting the footage, and pretending I'd never seen it. But I'm stubborn. The next day, I went back to Crestmer. Same time, same hallway, same camera position. I tried to replicate everything. The hallway was empty. I checked every window. No footprints on the floor, no signs anyone had been in that area. Nothing. No marks on the glass. No traces. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stood there for 30 minutes, watching for any movement. Nothing appeared. I could feel something there, but it wasn't showing itself. It was like that figure only wanted to exist in the recording, like it had gotten close enough to be filmed, but no closer. That was the day I learned something no one tells you when you start exploring abandoned places. Some things don't want to be noticed in the moment. They want to be recorded. They want you to carry their image home with you, to see it later, alone, in the quiet of your own house. And when you do, it sticks with you. You never forget. It's not a normal memory. It's like a piece of that presence takes up residence in your brain. You can't unsee it. That melted smile is still with me, even though I never watched the video again. The scene is burned into my mind, like I could blink and see it all over again. It was a spiritual presence unlike anything I'd ever felt. I never posted that video. I didn't even keep it on my computer. I took out the hard drive, destroyed it, and burned it in the backyard. I know what I saw. It wasn't an intruder. It wasn't someone messing with me. It wasn't a reflection. It was something mimicking my face, but wrong. Like it was testing possibilities. And the more I think about it, the more I believe it needed to be seen on camera, not in person. Because if I'd seen it in the moment, maybe I would have looked it straight in the eyes. And maybe I wouldn't have left Crestmer. Since then, I've followed one hard rule. I always review my footage carefully, frame by frame, even if it seems like there's nothing there. Because now I understand. The brain ignores strange details in the moment. It protects you. The camera doesn't protect you. It records even what it shouldn't. And I never explore alone without checking every window. Because I learned the hard way that some things aren't there to interact with you. They just need you to point a lens. They only need to exist for a second, in the background of a frame. And that's enough to follow you for the rest of your life. Horrifying, right? Some things don't want to scare you. They don't scream, they don't run, they don't attack. They just show themselves and wait. But in other places, it's not the image that gets you. It's the sound. Like in the next story, where someone heard a baby in a hospital where no one living was left. I couldn't tell if it was an echo, interference, or if something was actually there. But that childlike sound, that short rhythmic crying, broke the silence of that abandoned hospital in a way that felt wrong, like an audio file playing on its own in the dead of night. I'd explored darker places, more dangerous ones, heavy with negative energy, but nothing had ever made me feel like I was stepping into a place that still hadn't accepted its own death. It was a hospital in New York that shut down in 1993. So much of it was still untouched, especially the maternity ward. I could feel it holding on to a story that hadn't been released yet, like a memory stuck on loop, convinced it still needed to happen again. It wasn't about fear, it was about expectation, like something there had been waiting for me for 30 years. I walked into the maternity ward slowly, no rush, none of that explorer's urgency to find the scary thing right away. The floor was thick with dust, the kind that settles when no one's walked there in decades. The walls had that yellowed, nicotine-stained look, and the air carried the faint smell of mildew mixed with rusted metal. At the end of the hallway was a newborn recovery room, with those thin metal cribs from the 80s paint chipping, cobwebs underneath. And that's when I heard it, the first cry. 3 short mechanical sobs, like a tape repeating the same snippet over and over. 3 cries, pause. 3 cries, pause. Each sequence was identical to the last. There was no real emotion in it, no genuine sadness, no desperation. It was just the sound of crying, like a moment trapped, trying to replay itself so it wouldn't be forgotten. The kind of strange thing you can't explain with logic, but you feel there's some emotional reason behind it. I recorded it. I pulled out my phone, hit record, let it run. But when I played it back, there was nothing. Not even background noise, like the sound only existed for me. That's when the frustration kicked in, that sharp irritation when you're living something undeniably supernatural, and yet nothing captures it. I stood there for 5 minutes, breathing slow, listening. Every time I decided to leave, the crying started again. 3 short cries behind me, and it always seemed to come from the same spot in the room, like it had a fixed origin. I'd turned to look, but there was nothing. Just the empty crib pushed against the wall. But the second I turned my back, the sound came again. It wasn't shocking or startling. It was insistent, like the place was saying, "You can't just leave me in silence." At one point, I tried to rationalize it. I grabbed the crib and dragged it into the hallway, a couple of meters out of the room. Then I stood there, waiting for the sound to shift or stop. But when the crying came back, it was still coming from where the crib had originally been. That dry, prickly feeling crept up my spine, the kind you get when something defies basic logic, and your brain has to reset. The crying wasn't tied to the object. It was tied to a fixed point in space, like an old event had been recorded there, playing on loop no matter what. The longer I stayed, the more I felt something watching me, not in a threatening way, but almost politely. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't passive either. It felt like a presence sizing me up, trying to figure out why I was there. I wasn't scared. I felt like I'd accidentally walked in on a conversation that had been happening long before I was born. I turned to leave again, and the crying followed. 3 cries, short, rhythmic, precise. That's when I felt the weight of it, like a test, like the place was making sure I wouldn't treat it as cheap entertainment. Don't mess with this. I decided to spend the night. I set my phone up on a tripod, left the recorder running, and placed the crib right in the middle of the hallway. I wanted to see if it would move. Then I sat down farther away in the hospital, giving the space room to do whatever it needed to do without me interfering. I barely slept. I woke up 4 times. I didn't hear anything during the night. But by morning, everything had changed. My phone was dead, completely drained. The memory card was wiped, like it had been reformatted, and the crib, which I'd left in the hallway, was turned back toward the room's doorway, like someone had put it back in its proper place, facing the exit, as if an invisible baby had been positioned to watch the door. It all said the same thing. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a living memory refusing to fade. an emotional fragment stuck on repeat, determined not to be erased. I sat on the floor for a while, trying to make sense of it. I've never been the type to romanticize urban exploration. I don't make up stories. I was watching a memory replay itself, and that's what really got to me. I realized that crying wasn't about suffering. It was just the exact repetition of a single moment, an endless loop, like the hospital was preserving that 1 second forever, so it would never be forgotten. Maybe a baby who never took a breath, maybe one who breathed and then stopped, maybe a mother's trauma frozen in that instant. I don't know, but I know that Ward is still breathing that second, even after 30 years. I stood up, tucked my dead phone away, brushed the dust off my pants, and walked out of that hospital without looking back. I didn't leave because I was afraid. I left out of respect. I got the message. That place didn't want to be solved. It didn't want to be documented. It didn't want to become content. Some things exist on their own terms, and they don't need our validation. And there are things that shouldn't be posted, things that shouldn't be revisited. I never went back to that ward. I never told anyone where it is. I never shared a single photo. Disturbing, right? And the strangest part is that terror isn't always in what we see or hear. Sometimes it's in what touches you, without having a body. And it gets even worse when there's water involved, because water holds on to things that should never rise back to the surface, like in the story coming up now, where an entire floor was submerged. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying these stories. So hit the like button to let YouTube know you want more content like this, and not miss any horror stories. If someone had told me that before, I would have laughed it off as just horror fans being dramatic. But when I stepped down into the basement of that abandoned hospital, my first thought was that I was walking into a mouth. And it wasn't because of the darkness or the chemical stench that clung to everything. It was a physical feeling, like something was watching me, weighing me, standing there silent, still, waiting for someone to step into its space. And I had. I remember we stopped at the bottom of the stairs, flashlights on, the stagnant water lapping at our shins. It was thick, brown, with no reflection, as if it were too dense to mirror anything. I'd seen plenty of strange things in old hospitals. I work in structural inspection, and sometimes people call me in for weird infiltrations, foreign objects in mechanical ducts, or ancient piping. But this place had a different weight to it. It wasn't just abandonment. It wasn't just decay. It felt like a hallway that had been sealed to keep something down, not to keep people out. The state had granted us access for a preliminary assessment. They were deciding whether to demolish the building or repurpose it. There was funding for revitalizing old facilities, and this rural hospital was on the list. Everyone who'd ever worked there talked about the strange basement, the flooded floor that never stopped filling up. They'd pumped the water out countless times over the years, and it always came back, as if it were rising from below, not from the pipes. We went down to figure out if there was a crack, a connection to the water table, or some old maintenance tunnel. But the second I set foot down there, I knew something was off. The smell wasn't just mold and sludge. It was metallic, almost sweet, like someone had spilled antiseptic and left it to sit for months. The walls were peeling. There was no light, and our flashlights were the only source of illumination. There were 3 of us on that team: me, Mark, and Ryan. Mark was the first to comment on the water. He said, "It's heavy," like he was pushing his foot into gel. And I felt it too. The water wasn't just organic matter, it was denser, slower. We started moving cautiously, and soon we saw the submerged equipment, tilted, half buried in the muck. Safety straps from gurneys, rusted metal trays, breathing tubes sunk into the water, all abandoned as if the floor had been evacuated in a hurry. And the water muffled everything. Every step sounded like it was sinking into cotton. We drained a section with a portable pump, and as the water level dropped, we saw a chair. A child's wheelchair, small, and completely intact. No rust, no wear, like it had been left there for weeks, not decades. I remember holding my breath because that chair didn't belong. It wasn't in the inventory. The state's list didn't mention any pediatric wheelchairs, and it didn't fit with the rest of the place. It looked like someone had just pushed it in there. Ryan glanced at me with a look that said, "Don't touch it," and I shook my head. That chair unsettled me deeply. It felt like a misplaced clue, something put there to distract us from the real danger. But before I could think any further, Mark yelled. He was a few meters ahead, clutching his arm like he'd been stung. But it wasn't a sting. When he rolled up his sleeve, there was a mark, a bite mark, human teeth, no blood, no scratch, just the clear imprint of a bite. And minutes later, his skin was already healing. Fast. Like time was moving differently there. It was unnatural. No one had touched him. Nothing had come out of the water. No fish, no rat, nothing that could bite like that. Just a perfect set of teeth, as if an adult had bitten down hard but hadn't broken the skin. We started backing up slowly, never turning our backs. Then the water moved. Not like something had been thrown in. It moved like something was rising from the depths. A rounded shape with two bulges, maybe shoulders or the top of a head with short arms. We couldn't make out what it was, just a mass displacing the water. Slowly, like something was standing up down there preparing to come toward us. The feeling of being watched was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't fear, it was primal alert, pure instinct screaming at us to get out. And we did. We practically stumbled up those stairs, dragging Mark with us because he was shaking. I remember looking back as we reached the dry corridor, half expecting that thing to be following us. The state shut down any further investigation. We filed a partial report, described everything, including the wheelchair, and then we got orders from above to stop. No explanation, no follow-up. Just stand down. After that day, Mark changed. He started avoiding enclosed spaces. He had recurring dreams where he was breathing underwater, but not with lungs. He said it was like his skin was pulling in the air, like his body was the bellows. Sometimes he'd wake up feeling like there was stagnant water inside his chest. And I know it wasn't just trauma. Whatever happened left a mark on his body and his mind. Whenever someone asks if I'd go back, my answer is always no. Because that place wasn't sealed to keep curious kids out. It was sealed to keep something in. And when we drained that water, even just a little, I felt like we'd disturbed something that should have stayed undisturbed. Some places accumulate negative energy, strange events, spiritual presences. They become prisons for things that shouldn't walk among us. That hospital basement was one of those places. That child's wheelchair still haunts me the most. It was too new, too out of place. Just sitting there, centered like a toy left in the middle of a room to distract a baby. Now I think it was bait. Not for us. For something else that once existed down there. Something the water had been holding back. And if I learned anything from this, it's that not every mystery in a hospital is human or explainable in a lab. There are cells, bacteria, fungi, and then there are things I can't name. Things that move in the dark. Things that aren't corpses or animals. Things that lie quiet, waiting for the right stimulus to recompose themselves. When we drained that water, even for a few minutes, I felt like we woke something up. And I still have nightmares about it. Because the water down there wasn't just water. It was a barrier, a separation. And we removed it. We let whatever was down there know the world still existed. And to this day, Mark bears a nearly invisible scar on his arm. A faint, child-sized dental arch, as if a small mouth had marked him. And the longer time passes, the more certain I am that his torment isn't psychological. He wakes up with an itch under his skin, like something is trying to call him back to that water. Some say certain places should be forgotten. I agree, because if you keep digging for what's buried there, you might find an answer the human mind wasn't meant to handle. That was terrifying, right? Did you feel it too? Tell me what you thought in the comments. The only thing that genuinely caught me off guard during that exploration was realizing the basement wasn't part of the original blueprints. That's the kind of detail you can't ignore when you do serious urban exploration, not some teenage thrill-seeking stunt. I research. I compare old floor plans. I dig up demolition reports. I even look at foundation analyses when I can get my hands on them. The abandoned municipal hospital in Pennsylvania was a 1930s behemoth shuttered in '91, with that classic decayed vibe everyone imagines. But for me, the red flag started before I even stepped inside. The official records showed the basement ending at sublevel 1. But in the city's 1989 structural review, there was a note about reinforcing a beam on sublevel 2. And no one could show me a map of sublevel 2. That was a real glaring red flag. I went in with my standard gear. High-powered LED flashlights, a respirator with a fresh filter, a pin compass, 2 cameras, 1 chest-mounted, 1 handheld, extra batteries, a power bank, and a grease pencil. The ground floor and upper levels were the usual decay. Peeling walls, old water damage, shredded patient records. That damp, lifeless abandonment you expect in a place cut off from power for decades. Nothing new to me. The smell was exactly what you'd imagine from a building sealed up for 30 years. But when I reached the official basement, the air got heavier. It wasn't just mold. It was metallic, almost acidic, like wet rust mixed with stagnant water. I knew right away that a lot had gone down there that wasn't in any report. And then I got that unsettling feeling, the one where you're sure someone's watching but there's no one there. The official basement had some drainage tanks, and behind them, I spotted a strange metal panel. No labels, no room number, no markings. Just a smooth slab. But up close, the hinges looked newer than anything else in the hospital. Someone had installed that door later, maybe not long before the place closed. The weirdest part? No lock. A heavy metal door, hidden with fresh hinges, and no lock. None of it made sense. I pushed gently, and it creaked open. Behind it was a staircase, steeper than any maintenance stairway should be. No handrail, just raw concrete like someone had thrown it together in a hurry, or in secret with no concern for aesthetics. I took a deep breath, checked my battery levels, and started down. With every step, the air got colder. Not just ambient cold, it was like the temperature dropped in my chest, as if that space wasn't meant to connect with the rest of the building. I kept mental track of time and marked my path with grease pencil on the walls. I must have descended 20 meters or so, and when I looked back, the door was gone. In its place was a smooth concrete wall. No seams, no cracks, nothing. My grease mark was gone too. Impossible. I knew where I'd marked it. I pressed my forehead against the wall and felt something pulsing faintly, like when you lean against a distant turbine. But it was solid concrete. I'd never had a supernatural experience so direct, so physical. My compass started spinning wildly. My protocol is simple. When there's no way back, don't panic. I wrote the exact time and my initials on my wrist with a marker. I left a green glow stick at the base of the wall. I documented everything on camera, and I kept going down. The staircase narrowed until it opened into a larger chamber, and right in the center was a stainless steel gurney. But it wasn't old. It was pristine. No dust, no corrosion like someone had polished it yesterday. Impossible because everything else in that hospital was rusted to hell. That gurney was there like it had been waiting for me. I started panning the camera in a 360 and I heard it. A sharp knock, 3 deliberate taps. Not an echo from my boots, not concrete reverberation. It was wood, like someone knocking on wood behind me, but there was no wood down there. That's when the primal fear hit. I spun the camera around, but there was nothing. I tried to leave the chamber, but then I noticed something worse. The walls weren't raw concrete anymore. They were old sanitarium tiles with modern residential wiring snaking over them, like a 1970s or 80s renovation. None of it matched the hospital's timeline. I backtracked to where I'd left the glow stick, but it was gone. My grease mark was gone too, like the place was rearranging itself as I moved. I started hearing a buzzing inside my skull, an auditory pressure that wasn't coming from outside, like the space itself was pushing me deeper. My handheld camera screen filled with static, even though the battery was full. I turned down a side corridor. I needed another way out. I followed a lined tunnel and found a spiral staircase at the end. one of those 1960s emergency exit models. I climbed. Dozens of flights, maybe 5 stories worth. I emerged in a laundry corridor, but it wasn't the one I'd mapped. I'd literally surfaced in an unknown section. The metal cabinets were empty. I opened a side door and stepped into a main hallway. It was the hospital's ground floor, but not the one I'd entered. Same layout, but the rooms were mirrored. I got out as fast as I could through a side exit which was unlocked. When I reached my car, my watch showed less than 30 minutes had passed since I'd first gone in. But the chest cam? Over 5 hours of continuous recording. The battery was dead. The memory card was corrupted. Only the internal timer showed the time. It felt like a time distortion. I didn't just lose hours. I felt displaced, not just trapped, moved. That basement, that hidden level, shouldn't exist. But it does, and there's no official record of it. In the weeks that followed, I tried to salvage the footage. Nothing. Zero. Not a single frame of the underground survived. Like the camera couldn't capture what was down there. And the glow stick I left? Nowhere to be found. But what really got to me was the dreams. Ever since that day, I hear those 3 wooden knocks behind me. That rhythmic tapping. It won't leave my head. I know there's still something down there. I know someone or something still uses that subterranean level. I don't know if it's human. I don't know if it's physical. But it's being used. Because that gurney wasn't there by accident. That place wasn't just a forgotten hospital basement. It was a waiting room. And for a few minutes, I was what was being waited for. And look, if you made it all the way here with your heart finally slowing down, it's because you know some places hide things that were never meant to be found. If you're into these bizarre reports, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like if these stories messed with your head today, and comment a phrase down below so I know you stayed until the end. It can be something simple, like hospital basement. And there's another video right here with more terrifying stories. Click it and keep going with me over there.